Welcome to our virtual Family Council meeting. My name is Jamie Rose. I'm your virtual meeting coordinator. We're going to start off our meeting with our confidentiality reminder. Please refrain from using the name of your loved one. Do not name specific facilities. Please use a nursing home or the personal care home to present to the group. If you need specific assistance, please use the chat feature to state which county you're in, and we will get you connected to your assigned ombudsman. And just a reminder, these calls have public access and are designed for family members and friends of residents in long-term care facilities. Our meeting agenda. I'll be giving you our virtual meeting tips this evening as Jay is on vacation. Then we will go through our speakers on the process of how to file a complaint and what process happens. We'll see protective services first and then turn it over to the ombudsman. And then I'll come back on to follow up with our upcoming meeting topics. Alrighty, our virtual meeting tips for this evening. You have been placed in mute upon entry. We will open the lines in a bit so that you're able to share. If you would like to speak or have a question, please use the raised hand feature. Once you raise your hand, we will know to acknowledge you and unmute your line. If you hover your mouse near the bottom of your screen, you will see the participants tab. That can be expanded if you would like to see who all is on the call today. The chat feature is also at the bottom of your screen. Once you maximize it, you'll be able to send questions to our chat moderator or others during the call. Closed captioning is also available. To enable this feature, press the CC icon at the bottom of your screen and choose to enable closed captioning. If you need to step away, you can stop sharing your camera by clicking on the camera icon at the bottom of your screen. You can click on it again to start sharing your camera once again. Any concerns or complaints can be directed to the State Ombudsman Office at 717-783-8975 or by email ltc-ombudsman@pa.gov. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Corey to introduce our first speaker.
Okay. Elena will be speaking about protective services. She is currently the Director of Protective Services at Dauphin County Area Agency on Aging. She started her career in 2008 with Mifflin Juniata Area Agency on Aging as a care manager and protective services investigator. Then worked a short time as a mental health case manager, ultimately joining Dauphin County Agency on Aging in July of 2012 as a care manager. After a few months, she found her passion in protective services and quickly moved up in that unit. She worked as an investigator till 2015, at which time she became the supervisor of the unit. Then in 2020, she was promoted to a position that was created just for her, Director of Protective Services. She currently oversees a unit comprised of 12 investigators and 3 supervisors. Her responsibilities include quality assurance, policy writing, training, within the agency and in the community, as well as long-term care facilities. She also ensures that the unit is meeting all protective services laws and regulations. Go for it, Elena.
All right, thank you, Corey. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I have, since COVID, I don't get to get out and speak as often about protective services and what we do. And so even though this is still virtual, it's, getting back into things. And this is one of the parts of my job that I really enjoy doing. It's unfortunate that we have to have it, but I like spreading the word so people know that we are there, understand what we can do to help protect both the elderly residents in the facilities as well as our elderly members of our community. So as Corey said, my name's Elena Gillott. I am the director of our Protective Services Unit at Dauphin County Aging. And I'm going to talk about reporting, the investigation process, and outcomes. Okay, just to give you a little bit of statistics to show what we investigate and kind of what our caseloads are like. For the totals in 2020, there were a total of 1,868 reports of abuse received. Now it says there as well that we only investigated 1,161 of those. The other reports may go to Liberty Healthcare, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, which investigates ages 18 to 59. We also can take reports for other counties. So if we get a report for someone that's maybe in Cumberland County, we can't just say, no, sorry, you need to call Cumberland. We will take that report and pass it on. And we do also have the ability to no-need reports that we receive for allegations, but we have to ensure that there's no risk to the person, that they're able to meet their needs. And so that it happens, but it's pretty rare. The type of allegations that we look at are self-neglect, caregiver neglect, sexual, physical, and emotional abuse, financial exploitation, and abandonment. We look at all of those categories, both in the community and within long-term care facilities. And so looking at the total reports that we got in 2020, just to know that only 1 in 14 cases of abuse is reported. And when I started and became supervisor, we were ending out the year 2015, I think we ended with about 600 reports. So in just a matter of 5 years, we have doubled, almost, double and a half that amount of reports, and still knowing that statistic that it's 1 in 14 cases that are reported, it is out there. So, while I said in the beginning, it's an unfortunate thing that we need to exist. But we like seeing the increase in reports, which means that we're getting the word out there. People are knowing that we're there, and we're doing what we can to help our elderly members of our community. Next. So who can receive older adult protective services? And it says older because there are the 2 different programs. So older adult protective services are for people that are over the age of 60. They need to currently be located in Pennsylvania. They do not need to be a resident. And the way that we investigate is we investigate the agency that's responsible for investigating is wherever the adult is currently located. So they could be a resident of Cumberland County, but in, let's say, Harrisburg Hospital. So because they're in Dauphin County, our agency would be responsible for investigating that. But we have had people that have come here on vacations. We've had people that are traveling to meet family. And for whatever reason, they're still here, whether it's a short-term, a short period of time and they need protective services, or they've decided to move here and they're still, new to the area. If they're in Pennsylvania, we will investigate. There needs to be some kind of imminent risk to the person and or their finances. Imminent risk isn't clearly defined in our regulations, but it is, we look at happening soon, and that it's going to pose some kind of loss or injury to that person. And so everything really is a case-by-case basis. And it's not that we don't care about something that may have happened 5 years ago or something that could happen, in a year or so, but we really try to centralize on those cases that are happening now or are going to happen in, the very near future, perhaps within the next few months, that's going to, adversely affect the older adult in some way and put them at risk. So we will, examine every case as it comes in and determine, kind of what is that level. And if we feel that it's something that has either already been resolved, as I said, we do have that ability to no need need reports, which just simply means that we're not going to investigate them. But we also do our best then to make referrals. If it's something that we don't feel is appropriate for protective services, we can make referrals out to other entities. It might even be programs within our office, and it could be other programs and agencies within the community. They need to not have a responsible caregiver or be able to obtain sufficient goods and or services on their own. So if they don't have someone that is, able to help reduce that risk to them, or they themselves are limited either physically, mentally, or both in some way. For most of us, if we are maybe being scammed by someone, we can call our bank or go into our bank, shut down our accounts, take those steps that are needed, maybe find out how to report to the Attorney General's office. We could Google things and, figure out ways and kind of reduce that risk to ourselves. But for many, whether it is confusion, severe mental health, or something physical, even just an ambulatory dysfunction, maybe they can still get out and, go places, but it's not as easy for them. They can't just maybe, get up and go quickly and be right on top of things. So we want to look at that level of functioning of them, but then also, if they're unable to do it, do they have someone that is responsible that can do that for them, that can take care of things at the bank, that can get them to the doctor, whatever the need might be. So if they're lacking, one or both of those, then they would meet our criteria. And then, as I mentioned, they need to be physically or mentally incapacitated in some way. So as I said, it can be as simple as, someone has, they use a walker to ambulate. They still may, get out into the community, but just maybe not as often. Maybe they're a very high fall risk. So it could be anywhere from that to someone that is needs extensive assistance even getting out of bed. They don't really leave their home, or maybe they don't leave their home at all. So that's what we are looking at physical incapacity. Mental incapacity, again, it could be mental health. So it could be severe depression. That's making them, that's affecting them so badly that, again, they can't do whatever is needed to protect themselves. It could also be other mental health diagnoses such as bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, just anything that is limiting, again, their ability. It can also be dementia, any type of dementia. And again, it can go from any variation of confusion. I always kind of give an example of, maybe they're misplacing their keys, forgetting appointments, all the way to someone that doesn't even know who maybe their spouse and their children are anymore. And they're now, even losing motor function and that sort of thing. So, if they're falling into that category as well. We also consider fear and intimidation part of mental incapacity. If someone otherwise, has executive functioning, they can make decisions for themselves, they're physically capable, but they are so fearful and or intimidated by an alleged perpetrator that it is now, again, impacting their ability to reduce that risk to themselves, they too would fall into that category of being mentally incapacitated. Some people believe that it's more at a level of when someone would need a guardian, that they can no longer have executive functioning, so they can't make medical decisions, handle their finances, they can't understand a contract of some kind. And it is not need to be at that level for us to be involved. It could be, as I said, just simple, mild confusion that just happens occasionally. Next. Then there is adult protective services. I do have younger in parentheses there, just to kind of differentiate. We are called older adult protective services, our agency and what we investigate. And then there is adult protective services. So that is for anyone that is ages 18 to 59, again, with a mental or physical disability that limits one or more activity of daily living. So again, very similar to ours, but there needs to be that limit again of one activity of daily living, which is bathing, dressing, grooming, toileting, those personal care needs that we need to meet. They need some kind of assistance with those. They do need to be a Pennsylvania resident. I do want to say, if you have someone that maybe they're not, maybe they're from another country or another state and they're currently here and something's going on, I don't want to say don't call. Please still call. And that is something that the entity that investigates the adult protective services can review then. And again, if it's not something that they can take care of, they can make referrals out. So the criteria for adult protective services is a Pennsylvania resident, but like I said, please don't hesitate if you know someone and they're not a resident, but they're being abused in some way. They also investigate all of those types of abuse that I talked about in the beginning: the self and caregiver neglect, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, financial exploitation, and abandonment. You call your local aging office to report. So, in our county, it would be Dauphin County Aging. So we take those reports. So as I said, looking at those numbers of total reports and how that's, there's a difference between what we receive and what we investigate. Many of those are for adult protective services. So we take those reports and then we pass those on to Liberty Healthcare. They are the entity that investigates those, and they are overseen by the Department of Human Services, or it was previously known as the Department of Public Welfare. Older adult protective services, we are overseen by the Department of Aging. So we do have a little bit of a different oversight. But again, we still do the same thing. And when I talk about the process of what protective services looks like and the outcome, it is all going to be the same for adult protective services as well. Okay. So I just want to touch base a little bit on the different signs of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So physical abuse signs can be fractures, burns, restraint marks, multiple unusual injuries or hospitalizations, long delays before seeking treatment. When you're seeing things like this and there's no explanation or a plausible explanation for what happened. As we age, we will fall. It can happen. We can suffer fractures and have, burns and bruises. That's legitimate. But if there is no known reason for why it's happening or it's not making sense. I sometimes say when we get in there and investigate, we'll be told, especially in facilities, we'll be told something happened a certain way, and we'll actually try to even act it out. We'll look at medical records. We'll ask, doctors, is this plausible? Could this have happened the way that they're saying? So, if you're seeing injuries like this, that you are just, something just doesn't feel right. We're not saying it is physical abuse, but those can just be some of the signs. Emotional abuse, that is a little bit more difficult to substantiate, to prove, to investigate. But some signs of emotional abuse, unless you're seeing it firsthand, they can be depression. They're becoming withdrawn. They're isolating themselves. They report to you that they're afraid or intimidated. There's a change of demeanor in front of the perpetrator, and clients that have some type of dementia, or maybe they're nonverbal due to a stroke or whatever it might be. They might exhibit uncharacteristic behaviors, or their demeanor may change when an alleged perpetrator enters the room. So when we're looking at emotional abuse in the community, we are looking more at that long-term. I always say every family and inner circle communicates differently. Some are maybe just very loud and kind of harsh speaking, and that is just how they communicate. And it doesn't bother anyone, but someone else might hear it and think that it is, that it's emotionally abusive. We will still look at that and determine, again, is it affecting them in some way? But we're going to look at that long-term verbal abuse. But in facilities, it is a little different. Again, we're going to look at that long-term abuse. But we also want to look at, any caregiver, any paid professional. They should never be saying to a resident, if you weren't so old, you would be able to do this on your own, or they don't pay me enough to clean you up. Even if that is a one-time incident, that is something that should be reported to us. That is completely inappropriate, completely uncalled for. And, they're in a position of authority. They're caregiving. Residents are relying on them to meet their needs. And if someone's making a statement, even just one time, that can negatively affect a resident. And so, we see an emotional abuse then that they're changing their habits, even in facilities. Perhaps they would go out and they would go to the, activity room and they participated in things. And now they're just becoming more withdrawn and they're depressed, they're isolating themselves. So again, it doesn't mean that emotional abuse is occurring, but it can be signs that that's happening. Then we also look at sexual abuse and also harassment, which I'll talk about. And I didn't really think about putting that on this PowerPoint, but I will mention that as well. So sexual abuse can be, signs can be bruising in private areas or injuries, recurrent UTIs with no explanation, getting a sexually transmitted infection or disease, depending what you might call it, again, with no explanation. Residents or people in the community, they are allowed to continue to have intercourse. Sometimes we do get called on matters of consent. We are not lawyers and we're not police. So, we're going to look at are there injuries? Do they seem fearful in some way? So we can't necessarily get involved in matters of consent. But if it is seeming like they're not consenting, they're not enjoying it, there are injuries to it, we can get involved. And then we also do look at sexual harassment. And so those could be things such as grabbing someone's private area, trying to put their hand up their shirt, even if it's a one-time thing or it's repetitive, those are all things that we would look at. Sexual harassment would also be, sexual comments to someone. So if you are being told about those or you overhear something, those are things that would need to be reported to us. Next. Okay, so signs of neglect, and this falls this covers both self and caregiver neglect. So if we have someone, and again, this is community and also in long-term care facilities. So if you're seeing untreated medical issues, changes, blood sugars not being addressed, blood pressure, wounds, even, recurrent ear infections, recurrent UTIs, things like that are not being treated, or maybe they were seen once, but it's not getting any better and nobody's taking any action for that. Poor hygiene. So again, not being bathed, not being cleaned up after toileting, missing or out of date medications, or not updating medications after a doctor's visit, just mismanaging medications in any way. Not having appropriate supplies. That can be anything from maybe they need a walker, a Hoyer lift, a transfer board, something like that, to depends, clothing, anything that is needed to help meet meet their needs daily. Sores or wounds. Now, sometimes people are very sick, or they have illnesses that sometimes wounds and sores are just unavoidable. And I know, especially when I started doing this and I had seen wounds that were actually being treated and they still looked horrific to me. So, many of us, we're not doctors and nurses. So, if you're seeing wounds and you're just not sure, maybe you feel like you're not getting answers on whether or not they're being treated appropriately, a report can be made to us. And then we want to look to see, are they getting wound care? Are they being repositioned? Do they have a pressure relieving mattress? All of the different things that can go into their care to either try to eliminate sores altogether, or at least alleviate the degree to which they could get, to how bad they could get. Signs of dehydration and malnutrition, inadequate supervision. We do understand that, facilities right now, it is difficult to staff, but that doesn't exclude that people should not get care. It doesn't mean that they should not get appropriate care. And so I know we are actively trying to make a difference in some way, come up with ideas for better staffing, make it more enticing for people to work. But even just because there is a lack of staffing, it doesn't mean that people should be left at risk and their needs should not be met. So it can be the lack of supervision in a facility, but also in the community. If a doctor is saying someone in the community needs 24/7 care, and they're not getting it, that is something that we would investigate. Just an unexplained decline in health. Again, people are aging, it can happen, but sometimes we have people that just get very sick very rapidly with no real explanation for it. And then again, if there's no medical follow-up to that either, they're missing medical appointments. Sometimes, I've had a couple people in my career that have lived, they're in their 90s and they haven't seen a doctor since they were 30. They don't like them, they don't trust them, they're doing well. We're not going to go in and push people to go to the doctor unless we do feel there is something going on medically that's putting them at risk. But if you do have someone that is, in the past, they are normally on top of their appointments and now they're missing them, or they're in a facility and it is not being arranged that they're getting to appropriate, to their appointments on time, or at all, or they're being missed. Those are things that we would look at. Again, depression, withdrawal, other emotional problems are becoming, perhaps, their demeanor now changes. They used to be very active and now they're not. That can, and a lot of times too, not all the time, but a lot of times, the different types of abuse and neglect can go hand in hand. So a lot of times, for instance, with caregiver neglect, we'll also see emotional abuse. And so if they're becoming more depressed and withdrawn, there could be something going on. The caregiver expresses burnout. When we look at caregiver neglect, we have what we call an alleged perpetrator or perpetrators. They're the people that it's believed are committing this abuse or neglect. I don't have an exact statistic on it, but I say probably about 95% of our cases are not what we call an actual named perpetrator. It is someone that is that 95%, they're just trying. They're burned out, they're exhausted, perhaps they don't know resources that are out there. Income, it plays a big part in it. As I'm sure you're all aware, care, both in the community and in long-term care facilities, is very expensive. And so we're not out there just to have caregivers thrown in jail and take someone and just uproot their life. That's not our goal. We want to help not only the older adult, but their caregivers as well. But then we do have that small population of perpetrators that are acting maliciously and negligently. And so those are what we want to look at. So we look at that both in the community and in the long-term care facilities. If someone has a care plan and caregivers are, the aides and staff are not following that appropriately, that is being negligent. And if it is now putting them at risk, now in turn, their medical problems or diagnoses aren't being addressed appropriately. They now have wounds, whatever it might be. They're missing medications. They're acting negligently. And so that is something that we want to look at and then see what other measures we might be able to take. And then that kind of falls into it as well. This is sometimes more in the community, but again, it can still happen in facilities as well, where the caregiver doesn't always recognize the problems with care. Perhaps they were maybe raised, again, not to believe in doctors. And so when they see wounds, they don't really understand that it's something that should have been addressed. We sometimes have had cases where older adults will not want treatment of some kind, and that's okay. They have the right to refuse, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But when they become, then when they get to a point where they can't communicate or they're not understanding that risk to themselves, we need to get medical care for them, whether it's either through calling protective services or the caregiver should be taking those steps. And if they're not, again, then we're going to look at the whole scenario to see, what led up to that, what is their understanding, what resources did they have available to them, and go from there. Okay, next. Financial exploitation. And again, like I said, this is something that we will look at both in the community and within long-term care facilities. So there can be signs of unpaid bills. And to make a note on the unpaid bills, sometimes facilities will call us and say that so-and-so has not paid their bill to the facility. We will take a look at that, but there needs to be some kind of other evidence of exploitation. We're not necessarily a debt collector. So sometimes people will think if protective services is involved, that we'll get the bill paid. That's more of a civil matter that they need to work out either with the resident or whoever may be managing their finances. But if there is concern that they're being exploited in some way, that's that is what we will look at. So again, but unpaid bills, terminated utilities, if they're still in the community, or perhaps they're in a facility short term. Maybe it's for a rehab stay and they're planning to return home. Someone's supposed to be managing that, and that's now not happening. Some kind of unusual financial arrangement. Scams are a big thing. I am going to touch base on them a little bit. But giving access to someone they have never met, and it's over the internet, instances like that, giving multiple people access to their bank accounts, sudden new relationships. Again, we can see those in scams, but we've seen things as well. The new neighbor that's moved in next door, and they've made them their power of attorney within just a few weeks, versus, family that they've known forever, and are trying to do what they can to help them. There's a sudden change in power of attorney that's just not really explained, or maybe I don't want to say doesn't make sense. We are all adults. We have that right. If we have someone that we've appointed as our power of attorney and we want to change that to someone else, we have the right to do that. So do older adults. But sometimes it might be maybe someone that has a history of exploiting them, or has their own history of maybe not managing their own money appropriately. So, that could be some cause for concern. Unusual activity on an account. Perhaps someone is in a facility. We will see this a lot. Someone goes into a facility, all of their needs are met. Not that they, may not have food come in from outside, or, want things brought in from Walmart or something, but we'll have someone that's in a facility but then we'll look at their bank accounts and there's numerous Uber charges or DoorDash. They're eating out all the time. The liquor store's a big one. Even just buying groceries. So when we're getting into that, we want to look, and we always tell people, if you're either power of attorney or guardian, or you're a family member and or a friend and you're just trying to help out, if you are in any way helping to manage money for someone else, keep an accounting, keep your receipts. There could be a very legitimate reason for those Ubers, or maybe they were buying groceries or supplies to take to the older adult, but we need to see that and be able to verify that, because many times it's not. People figure, well, they're in a facility now, they have all of this money, I'm managing it, so I'm going to spend it on whatever I choose, and they can't do that. They're not receiving their bank statements. We see this a lot as well. Someone goes into a facility and they're asking to see their bank statements, and whomever is managing their finances won't bring them in. Maybe they keep making excuses, or they just say, I'm managing it, you don't need to see that. Just because someone else is managing their money does not mean that the older adult doesn't have a right to see what's happening with it. Even when we've had someone that has had a guardian appointed of them, the guardian will still give them, with the agencies that we work with, they will still provide to them an accounting. Maybe they don't quite understand everything anymore, but sometimes just looking at it makes them feel better. They have a right to still see that. The caregiver is not providing the needed goods and services. So like I said, sometimes they go hand in hand. So that would go hand in hand with caregiver neglect. They're spending all of this money on other things and not buying what is a necessity for their loved one. It could be food, depends, paying for medications, whatever it might be. And then having change in names on account, again, like adding new people, changing things frequently. Sometimes we'll get involved, with families that, for 1 month it's one person and the next month it's another, and it flip-flops back and forth. And then the older adult at one point just isn't quite sure what's happening with their money. Okay. Scams are huge now. We probably all get them on our home phones, now our cell phones. And you might just think, just because someone is a resident in a facility that they couldn't be a victim of that, and that is not true. There is still technology available to them. So we look at scams, whether it is people that are doing it from foreign countries, or it is someone within the facility. That doesn't happen very often, but it can. And so if you're seeing or you're being told about very large withdrawals of money, that is just not normal, and there's no explanation for it, paying the facility bill, it's not for that. If they can't, there's not a reason behind it. There's increased mail activity, because what happens once a person falls for a scam, any kind of scam, their information will be sold to other scammers. And so they'll get increased phone calls, they'll get increased mail, and it might look like it is, for instance, some kind of charity. We always want to recommend, before donating to a charity of some kind, that you are checking it out, finding out, is this a legitimate place? What do they do with their donations? Because sometimes they may even be legitimate, but they might only take 10 cents of every dollar for the charity itself, and then the rest, might go for profit. So you want to, check into things like that as well. They're sending money orders, they're writing or wiring money. The green dot cards are a big thing. There are several different types of cards out there that you can load money on, even just from a computer or over the phone. And then all they have to do is give the scammer this card number and the money is gone. Increased phone activity with unknown people, or it could be, you know, their new boyfriend or girlfriend or significant other that they've met online, and they're now talking to them on the phone frequently. And this person also, maybe they live in New Jersey, they say, and now they have a grandson, and now they're talking to the grandson as well, and they will go to these lengths. They will pull in numerous people to play different parts. And so now they're talking to the grandson, and the grandson needs help paying for boarding school because the grandfather needs to have a surgery. I mean, they come up with very elaborate stories, and they will learn their victim. They will learn about their family, their likes, their dislikes, their history. And then they'll learn from that. They'll learn that they're a dog lover. And so then they'll use that later, and they will go for months sometimes playing on this. So just, you know, anything that is different in that. The delivery of goods that are no use to the older adults. So they could be getting computers or cell phones. We've had some that have received, you know, 10 laptops at a time because they're being used as a mule and pushing that onto others. You can call us for these scams, but you can also file a complaint with the Attorney General's office. There's a phone number, and there's also an email address that you can email. Next. So how do you make a report? You can call the Elder Abuse Hotline. There's also a statewide number, but that number is for Dauphin County. Or you can just call our number. You can Google us, find us that way. We do take calls 24/7, 365. We always have someone, whether it's during business hours or we have on-call workers after hours. Helpful information to have is the name and contact information for the adult that you feel is at risk, information about their physical and or mental health, the kind of abuse that you suspect, the current level of risk, because then it determines how we'll respond. Is it life or death and we need to respond immediately, or can it maybe wait a few days? If there's a very specific incident or incidents, when did those occur? A name and description of the perpetrator, contact information, anything you can give on the alleged perpetrator is helpful. And a description of the environment, including any possible dangers that to the entering protective service worker. So just to touch base briefly on the process. So you call us, we get a report, and then it comes to management and we categorize it. So an emergency means there's an imminent risk of death or serious harm to the older adult, and that we need to respond to immediately. A priority, it's not quite that emergency situation, but they could still be at a serious risk. That we respond within 24 hours. A non-priority, there is risk, but it doesn't need that immediate intervention. Those tend to be the emotional abuse or financial exploitation. Those we have 72 hours to respond. To do an investigation, we look at all areas. So you may report to us self-neglect, but we are going to look at all of those other areas because sometimes, like as I said before, they can go hand in hand. So the investigation consists of a face-to-face visit, interviewing collaterals, looking at records, and of course, interviewing alleged perpetrators. The collaterals would be family, friends, roommates, staff in facilities, doctors, banks, anyone that can give us crucial information to our investigation. Then we make a determination. They're either unsubstantiated or unsubstantiated. If it is unsubstantiated, our case is done. Again, they need to meet that criteria that I had talked about. So if it's unsubstantiated, our case is closed out. If it is substantiated, then we present a care plan to the older adult with options to address their risk. Okay. So what is in a care plan? We try to develop it with the adult when possible, but sometimes there are things that we need to take action on quickly, maybe bringing food to them or getting them emergency medical care, or sometimes they might be too confused or they don't really want to participate. So we will create that care plan, but we do try to include them as much as we can. We'll also look at all of those areas of risk and how can they be addressed. And then the care plan will include things for the adult, for caregivers, family, facilities, service providers, and or the aging office to complete. So it could be anything from, we need you to go see your doctor. We need a caregiver to set up the meds and administer them correctly. We need a family member to help get them to the doctor. We go to facilities and ask them to update their care plans to make sure that certain risk is reduced. We, as I said, we can be involved and make referrals to different places as well. So that's what we do to develop a care plan when we have found risk. So as I mentioned a little bit before as well, older adults do have rights. Older adults and also the adults 18 to 59. So our goal is to offer services to older adults, but we still want to respect their right to self-determination. We have a regulation that states an older adult determined to need protective services has the right to refuse protective services, except as provided under a court order. So when is a court order necessary? When there is a serious risk of serious injury to their person or property, and it's determined that they're incapable of making their decisions. So sometimes people will get frustrated, like, why didn't you do anything? Sometimes we can't. If they understand that risk to themselves, or we don't feel that it meets that level of serious risk to themselves or their property, they have that right to refuse us. So we kind of just tell people, keep an eye on it, call us again. Sometimes we need several reports to kind of build a case to then be able to take other action. Okay. Confidentiality. What can protective services release pertaining to an investigation? We can talk with service providers, facilities, family members. We can tell them information, but it can only pertain to service planning. So, to our investigation, what information may they have? And then service planning, looking at that risk and developing that care plan. What do we need to do to help reduce that? If an adult is incapacitated and a person is their power of attorney or guardian, they may also be told additional information pertaining to their health and safety. And just so you know, the identity of reporters is protected by law. We cannot release that to anyone, not facilities, not the adult, not the alleged perpetrator, anyone. It is protected by law. Long-term care facilities and staff, enforcement of that. So if a facility or its staff is responsible for abuse or neglect, and the case is substantiated, we'll develop a care plan. We will do follow-up then to ensure the risk has been reduced, and that the same issues do not continue to occur. But if they are not resolved, we will then contact licensing. We don't have the authority to implement any kind of penalty against a facility. We can go to them and say, you put this person at risk due to whatever it is. Here's this care plan that we are saying, we feel you need to do to protect not only this adult, but perhaps other residents as well. But if they are not complying with that, or it is a very serious, we do report to licensing with all reports that we get pertaining to facilities. But if we have continued cares, we're going to call licensing and ask them to please look into this further. And then they are the ones that are able to implement penalties such as violations, fines, and restrictions. Just to touch base just briefly on protective services, ombudsman, and licensing. So for protective services, we are looking at that abuse, neglect, exploitation, and abandonment, like I had mentioned, and given you some examples of. Ombudsman, they are more about the resident rights. They can look at things as like call bell issues, not being allowed to participate in activities, concerns with discharge planning, concerns with care plans. They're really about the day-to-day life, and I know ombudsmen are going to talk more then. Licensing, they're looking, you would want to contact them for overall facility complaints. If you're feeling, it's putting everyone at risk or a majority of people at risk, or again, for major abuse or neglect that's causing serious bodily injury or death. Like I said, not only do we report it to them, but it helps as many people as we can to get them to notify licensing. Ombudsman and protective services. So by law, we cannot share information between our two programs. We cannot talk about investigations. Ombudsman cannot make reports to us if they learn about abuse. So if you feel that both programs should be involved, please contact them individually to voice your concerns. There are times that we seem to overlap a little bit, and that can happen, but we just by law, we cannot communicate with each other. So please make sure, if you feel that both entities need to be involved, to contact both of them individually. And that is it. I'm sorry, I probably went a little bit over my time, but that is my contact information. I always tell people, if you are not sure if this could be ombudsman or protective services or just something else, please feel free to reach out to me. I am happy to discuss different situations and see, what path should be taken. Okay.
Thank you, Elena.
Yep.
Next up, we have Eileen Barlow. She'll be speaking about the ombudsman's role in filing a complaint. So Eileen has been working as a local ombudsman with Schuylkill County since 2005. So she's quite experienced under the ombudsman program, but prior to that, she worked 18 years at a skilled nursing home. So she has a good deal of experience on both sides of that coin. She worked in pretty much every department there was at the nursing home. So she has a great perspective on both sides. So here we go, Eileen.
Thank you, Corey, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening to speak a little bit about the Ombudsman program and how we file complaints. The regulations are very clear that regardless of the level of care in which the consumer lives, he or she is entitled to live in an environment that provides quality of care and quality of life, and their rights are to be protected. And this is where the Ombudsman does come in. If at any time a resident or their family member, friend, close associate feels any of these rights have been violated, they have the ability to seek resolution, and this is where the complaint process can begin. Quite often when a resident has a complaint, they're a little hesitant to make that report, and the main reason for that is they're fearful. They're fearful of retaliation. They're fearful of being segregated from other residents. They are fearful of being abandoned by the staff. And most especially, they're fearful that they're going to be put out of the building. More often than not, I think we hear that where a resident says, but I don't want to get the staff in trouble. I don't want them to do worse to me than they're already doing. I'm afraid they're going to kick me out. And it's okay. Don't worry about it. I'll be fine. But it's never permissible for anyone to directly violate that resident's right to grieve. That is one of those inalienable rights, our life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, regardless of where we're living. And let's be very, very clear that a member of the staff or a member of the administration, and trust me, well, I think my fellow ombudsman will agree to this, there are times when the administrators can get very coercive. They can be very convincing to the resident that, we have the power, and the resident will always always be the ones in control. They cannot intimidate the resident. They can't coerce the resident in an attempt to make them withdraw that complaint. The resident will always have the right to grieve. So what do we need in order to make the complaint? Well, first of all, we need someone to make it. So that is the complainant, whether it is the resident's family member, responsible party, and then we need complaints. So if it's a call bell issue, if it's cold food, if it's lack of staffing, if the resident is being told they have to go to bed at a certain time, or they have to get up at a certain time, or they have to do this or that, it's a complaint. Anytime a resident tells us that something is not the way they want it to be, it's a complaint. So who can make that complaint? The resident, of course, and everything that we do is resident driven. So it can be a resident, it can be a group of residents. I recently had a case where 9 residents called and said, we want to talk to you. And we did have one spokesperson in the group, but it was actually 9 residents making multiple complaints all at the same time. The resident's family member or a responsible party can also make the complaint, keeping in mind that the resident is always the primary decision maker unless and until they have been deemed incompetent by a court of law. The power of attorney can make the complaint. And here's where things can get a little sticky. A lot of times when you have adult children who hold power of attorney, they seem to think that they know what's best for mom or dad, for grandma or grandpa, for whomever, for Aunt Jane or for Uncle Joe. But again, unless and until that resident is deemed incapable of making decisions, the power of attorney is simply an insurance policy. It is put in place so that in the event that the individual is not able to make their own decisions, the power of attorney is appointed to make the decisions that they know are the same decisions that the consumer would make. So they're not thinking in terms of what they want, but it's in terms of what mom or dad would want, of grandma or grandpa would want, of whomever they are the agent for. A legal guardian can also make a complaint. And once again, the legal guardians are put in place after an individual has been deemed incompetent by a court of law, and there's no one else who is capable to take on that responsibility, or there is simply no one there to take on that responsibility. In several cases, a protective service supervisor may act as a temporary guardian until a permanent guardian is put in place, or if a guardianship agency is employed to take over that resident's care. A facility staff person can make a complaint. And once again, I'm sure my fellow ombudsman will agree when I say we often hear from facility staff almost immediately after they resign from employment, or if their employment is terminated. Everything was great while they were working there, but all of a sudden, because someone did them wrong, now they're going to turn around and do them a solid as well. So facility staff can make complaints even if they see them right there and they're still employed, but quite often we do hear from facility staff after something was done to them, as in termination or a resignation under difficult circumstances. We have often received anonymous concerns. And again, this tends to be a lot of employees who have left employment or have been terminated. And you can pretty much tell who that complainant is going to be because they have what appears to be a lot of firsthand knowledge. And then we, as the ombudsman, can act as the complainant. It doesn't happen often, but it is definitely something that we can do. It becomes a little difficult sometimes to do that because we do have to be looking at things from both sides. We have to be independent and impartial, but it is an option for us if we choose to do so. So anytime an ombudsman receives a complaint, we meet with a resident if that resident is capable of meeting and is able to make decisions and essentially wants to see us. So if we receive a complaint from a family member and we meet with the resident and the resident says, I never asked them to call, or I see nothing wrong, we can always dismiss that outright, or, we can, if the resident will give us the ability to move forward, then we can move forward with the complaint. There is a 5-day window to initiate that investigation, but most of us will look into it as soon as we possibly can, most often within 24 hours or quite frequently on the very same day. It is on our initial visit to the resident that we provide information to them, and we encourage them to self-resolve. We're not going to come in on the white horse with the big spear going da 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 da. We're here to fix everything. That's not what we're here to do. We are here to empower the resident, to encourage them to use their voices and to resolve as best as they can. Now, the facility grievance policy and the Bill of Rights should have been something that those residents have seen from day one. Now, going back to day one, it's a very confusing time. There are people asking a million questions. The residents are being poked and prodded and moved into places they may not be familiar with people they don't know, sometimes with 1, 2, or even 3 roommates. So to say that they remember receiving that Bill of Rights or the grievance policy or signing something is probably not true. So it's a good thing to periodically go over this information. So some of the places and times where all of this information can be reviewed would be resident council. So when a resident attends a resident council meeting, there should be 1, 2, sometimes 3 resident rights that are reviewed by whoever is helping to moderate that meeting. During Resident Rights Month in October, we can put a bigger emphasis on resident rights and perhaps even do more activities surrounding resident rights. And as family members, you can encourage your residents, your family members and loved ones to speak up if they see something that is not quite right and not to the way they expect it to be. They're paying customers and they expect that the service that's being provided is worth the money that they're paying. The nursing home revisions to the regulations told us that there must now be a dedicated grievance officer. So going back to November of 2016, each of the skilled facilities must have a go-to person. Often it's the administrator, sometimes it's the social service director, but whoever that person may be, that must be in a public place where the residents can access the information. So in a lot of homes that I visit, the information is at the reception desk. Not a lot of residents go to the reception desk, and quite often the reception desk is in a place that is not near the residential area. So it makes it difficult for the residents to even realize that they can file a grievance. One of the biggest concerns that I have as far as telling a resident in writing who that grievance officer is that it's often in tiny little font. So you or I might not even be able to tell who the grievance officer is because it almost seems like it's in number 4 font. And I encourage the facilities to make sure that the grievance officer's name is in a large print that the residents can see. Most of them have a visual impairment. Most people wear glasses. A lot of residents have cataracts. Some have macular degeneration. Whatever it may be, they need to know. And I think a lot of times the facilities will make that font a little bit smaller in the hopes that maybe the resident just will pass by and not see it at all. Additionally, the grievance forms should be available throughout the home anywhere a resident is. So if there are several units or several floors to the home where your loved one lives, those grievance forms should be readily available to them. Additionally, they should have a drop box for any resident who wants to make an anonymous complaint, and they can make their complaints anonymous. The downside to that is the facility has no idea who's making the complaint. So if it's specific to one resident, it's a good idea for them to complete the form and sign their name so that there can be appropriate follow-up. And the grievance forms should also be brought to the resident council meeting, because the residents are going to express their concerns in that forum, and whoever is helping to moderate that meeting can also assist the resident in completing the grievance form. Personal care and assisted living residents do have the right to grieve, as anyone in long-term care facilities do. But in assisted living and personal care, there are no dedicated grievance officers in either of those settings. But once again, the residents will always have the right to grieve, regardless of the level of care in which they live. We as ombudsmen will always remain resident directed. We want the residents to be able to express their concerns and hopefully to self-resolve. So as part of that right to refuse, the resident can also choose not to self-resolve and pass the torch to us. However, that doesn't mean that we're going to do all the work. The resident is always going to be involved. They can choose not to file a grievance and just request that we go right to opening a complaint case for them. We will then provide direct assistance to the resident. And keep in mind that resident can withdraw the complaint at any time. In fact, if we come to visit a resident who has called us with a complaint and we get to the resident's room and the resident says, I changed my mind, I don't want to do this anymore, we're certainly not going to stand there and argue, but I had to drive X number of minutes and X number of miles to be here, and now you're turning around and telling me you don't want to file a grievance? Certainly not. We're not going to do that. If the resident does not want to open a complaint case or file a grievance, we can leave information with them in the form of our resident rights booklets. If we have any type of information on filing a grievance, we can leave that with them, with the assurance that if they choose to take us on one more time, then we can come back at any time. With the resident's consent and with that resident present, if they choose to be there, we can approach facility staff with the resident's concern, or have the facility staff come directly to where the resident is. Everything should be done in confidence, and it should be done privately. So if we're going to meet in a resident room, we should attempt to ask the resident's roommate to go to another portion of the building. Sometimes the complaining resident will say, it's okay, I don't mind him or her being here. And again, fine with me, fine with them, if it's okay with them. Resident information can only be shared with the knowledge and consent of the resident. When we open a case for the resident, we take specific information and we have a resident sign a consent form, if they are able to do so. And if a resident is not able to for a physical reason, or if they simply choose not to, we can sign on their behalf with the reason. Or if the resident has some type of physical impairment that will prevent them from signing their name legibly, we can have them make their mark, or they can give us verbal consent. The staff should not randomly offer information or charts without seeing that consent form. And once again, any one of us can go to any nurse's station in any of our long-term care communities and walk up to a staff member and say, I'd like to see Mr. Smith's chart. And 99 times out of 100, they're going to hand it right over. And they shouldn't be doing that. They need to know that we have that resident's consent and that we have it in writing. Every intervention that we have must have verbal consent of the complaining resident, and we should have that written consent with us as we're investigating the concern. And we need to keep in mind that consent is not just a blanket statement. So just because the resident signed a consent form one time doesn't mean that we can just go off and investigate. We need to have their consent each and every time. Our investigation should include interviews with other residents if it seems to be a widespread type of concern like cold food or call bell response, as that situation applies, as well as observation during the visit. So when we do an investigation, we don't necessarily go straight to the resident's room when we come into a community. We will appear to make a generalized visit, so a general facility visit. And at some point during that visit, we'll stop into the room of the resident who made the call or expressed the concern. And that way we can make our visit confidential, we can make it private, and the staff does not necessarily suspect why we're in the building. Now, if the staff has a resident who they consider a behavior issue or someone who is a complainer, a chronic complainer, the minute we show up, they pretty much have an idea of why we're there. And they will suddenly become very attentive. They will come to check and see if the resident needs water, if they need to go to the restroom, if they'd like to go to an activity, if they'd like to leave their rooms. And, you know, we all play the game together. So we just stop our interview. And once that staff person leaves the room, then we pick up where we left off. We would ask open-ended questions of other residents so that there's no suspicion of who we're going to see and what the general concern might be. And we go on from there. If we see that there is quite a number of concerns that we feel need to be addressed with facility staff, we can ask for a care plan conference. It's a good idea to do this so that we have all the parties at the table at the same time listening to the same things. Because if we go from resident to staff person to other staff person, back to resident to another resident, it's always going to get lost in translation. So if we have that care plan conference, we have the resident. If they want a family member or a responsible party there, we will do that. We will be there, of course. And if it's a concern with nursing, we'll have someone from the nursing department. If it's a food issue, someone from dietary, and so forth and so on. The investigation will always be an objective one. We as ombudsman are going to be the impartial person who is going to see both sides of the issue. And we're going to try and develop a resolution that is agreeable to the resident and eventually to the staff as well. So we're not looking to lay blame. We're not gonna, we're not gonna be hiding in corners and jumping out of closets and underneath beds to see what's going on. We're there to focus on the fact that the highest quality of care and quality of life is what the residents deserve. As I said earlier, they're paying for a service the same way we would pay for a meal in a restaurant, to have our car worked on, to go to the beautician, anywhere service is provided. We are essentially a consumer advocate, not the Ralph Nader consumer advocate, but consumer as the resident and advocating for their highest quality of care and quality of life. So if we can't resolve the problem, I think a lot of times the ombudsman are looked at as coming in with the big cape, the superhero cape, that we're going to come in and fix everything. And there are times when we simply can't. If we are unable to achieve a satisfactory resolution to that resident's problem, we may need to refer to another agency. If we realize that it is not a resident rights issue, but it becomes a protective services issue, we can make a call with the resident's permission or have the resident make a call to protective services. We do nothing without the resident's consent. So even if a resident calls us in and says, my aide slapped me across the face this morning because I rang the call bell too many times, but please don't tell anybody. We can't tell anybody. Sadly, we are not mandated reporters because of that conflict of interest between protective services and the ombudsman, but we can attempt to empower that resident to contact protective services if they feel the need to do so. Each level of care does have its own regulatory or oversight agency, and anyone can contact those offices. So for your nursing home residents, the Department of Health is the oversight agency. Some counties deal with more than one field office, as we do in Schuylkill. So the northern part of Schuylkill County deals with the Scranton field office, and the southern part of the county deals with the Lehigh Valley field office located in Bethlehem. For personal care and assisted living, the Department of Human Services in Scranton would be your go-to for oversight agency issues. Our work is never done until the resident is 100% satisfied. And once again, we can't please all the people all the time. There is no time frame as to how long a case should take until it's resolved, but naturally, the sooner the better. If it's a problem with cold food, it's a problem with call bell response, if it's a problem with pain or issues that are not being addressed in a timely manner, we want to see that happen as quickly as possible. But there may be some issues, for example, a resident who receives a 30-day notice to discharge. We can advocate for them with their permission, and if the facility is saying a resident can no longer live there, the appeal process is going to take quite some time. And for anyone who does receive that 30-day written notice, the resident does have the right to appeal it. With any problems, the issues should be fixed as quickly as possible, but in the situation such as the discharge notice, it's going to take at a minimum 30 days. And, with the pandemic in place, a lot of discharge notices and appeals are being scheduled months out, and decisions are being rendered even longer than that. The last discharge appeal that I did took 6 months for a decision to be rendered. So, once that decision is rendered, the opposing party can also appeal that decision. So this could go on for quite some time. We also have to be prepared that some concerns will never be resolved to the complete satisfaction of the resident. We all know that there are residents who simply cannot or will not be satisfied. We try as hard as we can. We do the best we can. We know in a lot of cases the facilities also do the best that they can. But some things are simply out of our control, and we just have to roll with the punches. If we know the resident is safe, if we know that there is no abuse, if we know that the facility is providing the best care and the best services that they possibly can, we may simply need to say we can't do much more. The facility will always say to a resident, well, if you're not happy here, you can always go somewhere else. And that's not necessarily the answer that we want to hear. We want to make sure that the facility is working as hard as they can to satisfy the resident to the best of their abilities. Either way, we're going to follow up as part of our job. So if the resident is satisfied, we're still going to follow up to make sure that everything is being done up to snuff, the way they want it to be. If the resident is not satisfied, we're still going to go back in and check to make sure that the home is doing what they're supposed to do. And if necessary, down the line, we may need to open a case again. But once we've determined that all of those complaints have been resolved, whether it's partially or fully, not at all, sometimes the resident will withdraw that complaint, we can close that case. We should, however, continue to be observant, to listen, to see, to smell, to observe what's going on around, to make sure that the problems that we think we have resolved do not reoccur. Finally, don't be afraid to make your concerns known. A lot of times families will say, I don't think it's a good idea for me to say anything because I don't want them to be mean to my mom. I don't want them to put mom out on the street. I don't want this to get worse. And if you're going to be the advocate for your family member who cannot speak for himself or herself, it is your job to be their voice. You do become their advocate. You know them better than anyone else does. If it's a parent, if it's a sibling, if it's a grandparent, an aunt and uncle, a close friend, a spouse, whoever that consumer may be, you know them. You know what's best for them. You know what they like. You know what they don't like. You know what they deserve. As always, if you see something, say something. Don't hesitate. Don't wait, because the longer you do wait, the harder it becomes to solve the problem. People forget things. Staff members who may be the cause of concerns may no longer be at the home. Any number of things can happen. People forget. By not reporting, we simply allow the bad habits to continue. And this is something that I've told our family members, our residents, even our staff members. If you let this go by the wayside, everybody thinks it's the right thing to do. And it's not. It's not just fine. Again, you're paying for a service. They're paying to stay there. They have turned over every penny that they have to stay there, and they deserve the biggest bang for their buck. You would send cold food back in a restaurant. A resident should know that they have the right to send cold food back. If I don't like the way I look when I come out of the beautician, I want them to fix it. If I'm not satisfied with the way my car was fixed, or if my car isn't fixed, then I want the mechanic to work until it is fixed. And that's what the staff has to do. That's the end result of that grievance process, or with case investigation. The end says that the resident is satisfied and everything is okay now. Some of the resources that are out there for us are your local long-term care ombudsman. If you don't know who that individual is, you can call your local area agency on aging, and they will let you know who the ombudsman is for your particular county. There are 67 counties in Pennsylvania with 52 ombudsman programs. So if you are in Bradford, Sullivan, Susquehanna, and Tioga counties, you have one ombudsman between all four of you. If you are in Huntington, Bedford, Fulton, you have one ombudsman for 3 counties, or Columbia, Montour, or Union, Snyder. In Schuylkill, I'm it, plus a lovely volunteer component. We have wonderful volunteers who are willing to go out even during pandemic times when they were able to get in and make visits to our residents. The ombudsmen are there. The services are free of charge. They are without regard to income, and they are confidential, and they are private. The Department of Aging is another resource if you need to know who your ombudsman is. They are part of what we do here tonight, and they are an ongoing resource even for us as ombudsmen. The state long-term care ombudsman, Margaret Barajas, has been one of our biggest fans and one of our greatest supporters. So we are appreciative to have her available to us as well. Your oversight agencies, the Department of Health, the Department of Human Services, your local area agency on aging, however they are labeled. For us in Schuylkill, the Office of Senior Services. As an aside, because everyone was calling the Auto Club when they heard AAA, and the AAA actually said, if you don't rename yourself, we're going to have to do a little something about that. So in Schuylkill, the Office of Senior Services. In places like Lycoming County, where it's STEP, or it may be, you know, a totally different name to your agency, but it's all the same at the end of the day. And then the Protective Services Division in your area agency on aging. Your protective service supervisor. As Elena said early on, they are there 24/7, 365. They're even there 366 on Leap Day. They're there on Arbor Day. They're there on Christmas Day. There's always someone to take a call if you need to. If it is determined that the issue is more a resident rights issue than it is an abuse allegation, then the protective service agent will refer back to us as ombudsman. Either way, don't be afraid to make the call. You are your loved one's greatest advocate, and we are here to serve them as best as we possibly can. It's great to be able to get back out and see our residents again. We have missed them as much as you have missed them. And it's a great pleasure and privilege to be able to be with them now and to help them in any way that we can. Thank you for your attention, and let us know if you have any questions or concerns.
We did have one question in the chat. It says, NPA, cannot a psychiatrist deem a patient incompetent and therefore the POA should make all decisions regarding healthcare? You stated only court determines and appoints guardian. This is an arduous and expensive legal process.
Okay, so the psychiatrist can certainly deem an individual incompetent. A physician can actually put a note in the chart that says that the resident is not able to make decisions for themselves. Quite often, they will sign off on a form that says a resident is unable to manage their own finances. That's what we see more often than not. The physician can, and I think if a resident has a dementia diagnosis, and again, depending on the level of the dementia, is going to determine whether a resident still has the ability to make their own decisions. Yes, the guardianship process is arduous. It is expensive. And you take on an awful lot as a guardian. It's not just being there to make decisions, it's being there in person. So if there is a guardian appointed through, let's say, a guardianship agency, that guardian has to at least lay eyes on that resident once a month. So it's not, I'm just going to be a guardian off to the side somewhere and make a phone call to me when there's an issue and you need a yes or no answer. When we are determining guardianship, the psychiatrist can do that, but I believe we need to have 2 medical professionals who will sign off on a resident who needs to be determined as not able to make decisions or to be deemed incompetent. I would have to check on that. So I won't say it's in stone, but I believe that you need 2 physicians to be able to determine that as well.
Another good point,
Thank you.
Eileen, is mostly, I mean, guardians are there for folks who didn't, put a power of attorney in place ahead of time, or there's nobody to act on their behalf. So that's another good point. Just because, somebody's incapacitated, they're not automatically going to get a guardian. If they already have a power of attorney who's willing and able to act on their behalf, then that's how it's going to go. But if you do need to get to that process, then that's when the guardianship gets involved, and it's about $2,000 or more to get established through, all the legal fees and whatnot. So just a little bit off to the side. So I didn't want anybody to panic and think that they automatically needed a guardian if somebody has an Alzheimer's or dementia diagnosis. That's not what we're talking about. So, but each case is so individualized that we would encourage you to call if you have any more questions or need any more specifics. We're here for you. And if we don't know the answer, we will find it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Eileen. I feel like we should tip you extra for the sound effects. That was fantastic.
What sound effects were there?
That horn that you did was just, bringing in the white horse and the cavalry. I can't.
Oh, there you go.
That was fantastic. But thank you so much. You have a wealth of knowledge and fantastic presentation, and Elena as well, but I think she had somewhere else to go. I don't see her on anymore, but we definitely appreciate both of your presentations. And look forward to putting those on Facebook later, because there's a lot of information and I probably missed something. I'll probably have to watch a replay again. Just to let everybody know our upcoming meeting topics. So on May 31st, we are going to hear from an organization called Dementia Friends. So anyone who attends the next session will actually be a certified dementia friend if you stay on for the entire meeting. So we're pretty excited about that. And then we are going to do a policy and regulation update with an open discussion meeting on June 14th. And we're still working on something for the 28th. So to be announced. All righty. And as always, thank you so much for attending the Virtual Family Council. Any specific questions, State Ombudsman Office 717-783-8975, or send Jay an email at ltc-ombudsman@pa.gov, or you can always hop on over to the Facebook page where we'll get you some answers, and you can check out all the other videos as well. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening.